The police handcuffed a man with a disability in his own parking spot. What he did next stunned everyone. But first, remember to subscribe to our channel so we can keep sharing incredible stories. Jacob Miller, a 35-year-old software engineer, had always been known for his resilience. Living in Greenfield, a quiet town in Pennsylvania, Jacob had adapted to life with his prosthetic leg following a car accident years ago. Despite the challenges, he prided himself on maintaining his independence. Every Saturday morning, he followed the same routine: grocery shopping at the local Greenfield market, where he parked in the designated handicapped spot, proudly displaying his disability placard. This Saturday seemed no different. Jacob parked his modest sedan, grabbed his shopping list, and stepped out with his cane in hand. As he adjusted his jacket, he noticed two police officers, Officers Briggs and Monroe, approaching. Their expressions were stern, and Jacob felt an unspoken tension fill the air. "Excuse me, sir," Officer Briggs began, glancing at Jacob's prosthetic leg, but quickly averting his gaze. "Is this your vehicle?" Jacob nodded. "Yes, officer." "Is there a problem?" "We've had complaints about misuse of the handicapped parking spots," Monroe interjected. "You'll need to provide proof that this placard belongs to you." Jacob frowned, reaching into his wallet. "Of course. Here's my driver's license, registration, and proof of disability." As Jacob extended the documents, Briggs barely glanced at them. Instead, he gestured for Jacob to step aside. "We need to verify this." "But everything is right here," Jacob insisted, a trace of frustration in his voice. Monroe's tone sharpened. "Step aside, sir." The situation escalated quickly. Bystanders gathered, murmuring amongst themselves, some taking out their phones to record. Jacob felt his heart race as Briggs reached for handcuffs. "This is unnecessary," Jacob protested. "I've complied fully." "You're obstructing our investigation," Briggs retorted, snapping the cuffs around Jacob's wrists. The crowd gasped as Jacob, visibly shaken, was led away. "This isn't right," he said, his voice breaking. "I parked legally." As the officers placed him in the squad car, Jacob locked eyes with a woman in the crowd holding a phone. She mouthed, "I'm recording." The door slammed shut, leaving Jacob in stunned silence as the car pulled away. His mind raced, not with fear, but with a firm resolve. This injustice would not define him. By the time Jacob was released later that afternoon, the world outside the Greenfield Police Department had already begun to take notice. The video of his arrest had been uploaded to social media, quickly gathering views and sparking outrage. In the footage, Jacob's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the aggressive actions of the officers, and the visible shock of onlookers only fueled the public's ire. At home, Jacob sat in his modest living room, scrolling through the dozens of comments and messages flooding his phone. "This is outrageous," one comment read. "Typical abuse of power," said another. "I stand with Jacob," many others proclaimed. He wasn't sure whether to feel vindicated or overwhelmed. The sheer volume of attention was unlike anything he had ever experienced. A message from a local disability rights group caught his eye. "We saw the video. Let's talk." Jacob took a deep breath and replied, agreeing to meet them. Moments later, his phone buzzed again. It was from his old college friend Emma Rivera, now a civil rights attorney. "Hey, Jacob, I saw the video. We need to discuss your next steps. Call me ASAP." Jacob hesitated. He wasn't one to seek out conflict, but this wasn't just about him anymore. The humiliation he endured was one thing, but the larger issue of systemic bias against people with disabilities weighed heavily on him. He dialed Emma's number. "Jacob, what happened to you is unacceptable," Emma said, her voice firm. "They had no right to treat you like that. You were compliant, and their actions were discriminatory. Are you ready to take this public?" Jacob glanced at the video still playing on his laptop. "I don't know. I'm not a confrontational person, Emma, but you're also not someone who lets injustice slide, she countered. This isn't just about your rights. It's about what this says to every person with a disability who's ever felt invisible. The next day, Jacob stood before a small crowd at a community center, flanked by members of the local disability advocacy group and Emma by his side. Microphones and cameras surrounded him, a stark contrast to the quiet anonymity he'd once cherished. I never wanted this kind of attention, Jacob began, his voice steady but emotional. I parked legally. I complied. And yet I was treated as though my disability was a question rather than a reality. This isn't just about one bad day. This is about ensuring that no one else faces what I did. The room erupted in applause. Reporters peppered him with questions, and Jacob answered them with measured honesty. Emma outlined plans to file a formal complaint against the police department, and the advocacy group announced a rally for disability rights later that week. As the press conference wrapped up, Jacob felt a mixture of exhaustion and empowerment. For years, he had quietly faced the subtle indignities of a world not built for people like him. Now, he was stepping into a role he hadn't chosen, but couldn't ignore. The community was behind him, and the world was watching. The rally outside Greenfield City Hall was a sea of people holding signs that read, "Justice for Jacob," and "Disability rights are human rights." What had begun as a small protest organized by local activists had grown into a movement that attracted attention far beyond the town. National news outlets had picked up the story, with hashtags like "Stand with Jacob" trending across social media. Standing at the podium, Jacob felt the weight of the moment. The same man who had been escorted in handcuffs just days earlier now commanded the attention of hundreds. Beside him were Emma, representatives from national advocacy organizations, and a few local leaders who had publicly condemned the officer's actions. Jacob adjusted the microphone. "I never thought I'd be here speaking to so many of you," he began. His voice wavered for a moment but grew stronger as he continued. "This isn't just about me. It's about the respect and dignity that every person deserves. Being disabled doesn't make us less human, less deserving, or less lawful." The crowd erupted in applause, but Jacob held up his hand to quiet them. "This experience has revealed an uncomfortable truth. If my rights can be disregarded so blatantly, what's happening to those who don't have cameras watching, to those who can't afford an attorney like Emma or don't have a platform to tell their story?" As Jacob finished, Emma stepped forward. "What happened to Jacob is a violation of civil rights, plain and simple. Today, we are filing a formal complaint with the Greenfield Police Department, demanding a full investigation into the officer's conduct and the department's policies regarding individuals with disabilities." The crowd cheered, and Emma handed a copy of the complaint to a reporter, ensuring that the document reached the public domain immediately. Back at the police department, the mood was tense. Chief of Police Douglas Harper paced his office, watching the news coverage with a grim expression. The department was already facing backlash from local businesses, and now the mayor had called for a review of their training procedures. "Sir, we have a problem," said his assistant, stepping into the office. "There's a petition circulating online. Over 50,000 signatures already, calling for the suspension of Officers Briggs and Monroe." Harper sighed. "Bring them in." Briggs and Monroe entered, their usual confidence replaced with nervous tension. "You wanted to see us, Chief?" "This situation has spiraled out of control," Harper said. "The footage makes us look like we targeted a disabled man for no reason. You assured me this wouldn't escalate." "Chief, we were following protocol," Monroe insisted. "Protocol," Harper snapped. "You handcuffed a man with a prosthetic leg in front of witnesses, then couldn't even verify his documents before dragging him to the station. That's not protocol, that's incompetence." Outside the station, Jacob's supporters were chanting, and the sound filtered into the office. Harper shook his head. Effective immediately, you're both suspended without pay pending an internal review. Turn in your badges and firearms. The officers exchanged uneasy glances but complied. As they left the office, Harper sat down, rubbing his temples. This wasn't just about two officers. It was about a department's failure to adapt to an evolving world. Meanwhile, Jacob's story reached new heights when a daytime talk show invited him for an interview. Sitting across from the host in a polished studio, he recounted the events of that day and the unexpected movement it had sparked. "What do you hope comes from all this, Jacob?" the host asked. Jacob looked into the camera, his voice steady and resolved. "I hope it changes how we think about disability, not just in terms of rights, but in how we treat people. It's not about special treatment, it's about equal treatment. And I hope no one else has to endure what I did just to prove they belong." The audience erupted in applause, and Jacob realized that his fight was no longer his alone. It was a collective mission, one that was gaining strength with every story shared and every voice raised. Jacob sat in his kitchen late at night, his phone glowing with endless notifications. His story had gained so much traction that he barely recognized his life anymore. News outlets from across the country were calling for interviews, and his social media following had exploded overnight. Messages of support flooded in, but so did threats and criticisms from those accusing him of blowing things out of proportion or seeking attention. Still, Jacob's focus remained sharp. With Emma's help, he began drafting proposals to present to the City Council, aiming to implement mandatory training for police officers on interacting with individuals with disabilities. It wasn't just about his case anymore, it was about systemic change. The City Council meeting that week was standing room only, filled with reporters, activists, and concerned citizens. Jacob entered the chamber to a round of applause. He glanced at Emma, who gave him an encouraging nod as they took their seats. Mayor Elena Carter called the meeting to order. "Today, we address the recent events involving Mr. Jacob Miller and the Greenfield Police Department. This case has brought national attention to our policies, or lack thereof, regarding the treatment of individuals with disabilities." Jacob's name was called, and he approached the podium. The room fell silent. "Madam Mayor, members of the council," Jacob began, gripping the edges of the podium. "I stand before you not as someone seeking revenge, but as someone who wants to ensure that what happened to me never happens to anyone else." He outlined his proposals. Enhanced disability training for public servants, a citizen review board to oversee complaints against the police, and a public awareness campaign to address prejudice against people with disabilities. When Jacob finished, the room broke into applause. Mayor Carter raised her hand, calling for order. "Thank you, Mr. Miller. Your courage is commendable, and your proposals deserve our serious consideration. The council will deliberate and announce our decision in the coming weeks." With the help of Emma and local activists, he established Equal Access Alliance, an organization dedicated to promoting accessibility and fighting discrimination against people with disabilities. Within weeks, the group gained non-profit status and began receiving donations, including a surprising contribution from a tech CEO who pledged $50,000. "Jacob," Emma said during a planning session, "this is getting bigger than we ever imagined. You're not just fighting for local change anymore, you're becoming a national voice for disability rights." Jacob smiled faintly. "It's overwhelming, but it's worth it." Despite the progress, Jacob couldn't forget the lingering tension with the police department. The officers involved had been suspended, but no formal apology had been issued. That changed one morning when Jacob received an unexpected phone call. "This is Chief Harper," the voice said. "I'd like to meet with you." The chief greeted him with a firm handshake and gestured for him to sit. "Mr. Miller, I want to start by apologizing," Harper began. "The way you were treated was unacceptable. It exposed flaws in our training and judgment, and for that, I take responsibility." Jacob nodded, his expression neutral. I appreciate your words, Chief, but an apology alone doesn't fix the systemic issues. I agree, Harper said. That's why I'm here to discuss actionable steps. We're implementing a new training program for officers, and we'd like your input. Additionally, I'm proposing a community liaison role focused on disability issues. We'd like you to consider taking that position. The offer took Jacob by surprise. I'll need time to think about it, he said, but thank you for the opportunity. He thought of the people who had supported him, the lives he hoped to impact, and the work that still lay ahead. Before heading to bed, he drafted a new mission statement for Equal Access Alliance, a world where equality isn't a privilege, but a guarantee. Months later, the Greenfield Civic Center buzzed with energy as the town prepared for a groundbreaking ceremony. Banners reading, "Equal Access, a New Era," fluttered in the breeze. Jacob stood at the center of it all, wearing a crisp suit and holding a speech he had rewritten a dozen times. The event marked the culmination of months of relentless effort, the launch of a new initiative for disability inclusion and accessibility in Greenfield. The City Council had not only approved Jacob's proposals, but had allocated significant funding to create a task force for disability advocacy. A new ordinance required comprehensive training for all city employees on interacting with individuals with disabilities, making Greenfield a pioneer in accessible governance. Jacob glanced at the crowd. Familiar faces. Emma, members of the disability rights group, and even Chief Harper smiled back at him. But what truly moved him was seeing individuals with disabilities from all walks of life, some in wheelchairs, others with service animals, all gathered to witness history. Ladies and gentlemen, Mayor Carter began, her voice amplified through the speakers. Today, we celebrate a community united by a shared commitment to justice and inclusion. This moment would not have been possible without the bravery and persistence of one man, Jacob Miller. The crowd erupted into applause as Jacob stepped forward. He took a moment to absorb the scene, the culmination of a journey that had begun with humiliation but transformed into empowerment. I am honored to stand here today, Jacob began, his voice steady but emotional. This isn't about one person or one incident. This is about recognizing the dignity of every human being, regardless of their abilities. For too long, individuals with disabilities have been excluded, misunderstood, and underestimated. But today, Greenfield takes a stand to change that. He paused as the applause surged. This initiative isn't just about policy. It's about culture. It's about teaching our children to see beyond differences and instilling in our institutions the values of fairness and compassion. Jacob's voice grew stronger as he continued. When I was handcuffed in that parking lot, I felt powerless. But the outpouring of support from this community and beyond reminded me that we are never truly alone. Together, we've turned a moment of pain into a movement for progress. As he concluded his speech, the crowd rose to its feet, clapping and cheering. Tears welled in Jacob's eyes as he realized the magnitude of what they had accomplished. The day ended with Jacob signing the charter for the new accessibility initiative alongside Mayor Carter and other city leaders. Photographers captured the moment, immortalizing the image of a united community. Chief Harper approached Jacob after the ceremony, extending a hand. You've inspired real change here, Jacob, Harper said. Thank you for helping us see what we couldn't before. Jacob shook his hand, appreciating the sincerity. It's not just about me. It's about all of us. And there's still more work to do. Jacob was invited to speak at conferences and universities, sharing his story and promoting inclusivity. His humility and determination resonated deeply, inspiring others to take action in their own communities. Emma, now a board member for Equal Access Alliance, frequently reminded him of how far they'd come. You've changed lives, Jacob. she said during one of their strategy meetings. But more importantly, you've shown people that they can demand better. Jacob smiled. We've changed lives. This was never just about me. Sitting at his desk, he scrolled through emails, each one a testament to the impact of his work. Messages from parents of children with disabilities, local officials seeking guidance, and even strangers thanking him for his courage. As he closed his laptop, Jacob gazed out the window at the small town he had called home his entire life. Greenfield was different now, not perfect, but better, and in his heart Jacob knew that the ripple effect of their efforts would continue long after this chapter ended. Years later, a bronze plaque was unveiled in front of Greenfield City Hall. It bore the inscription, "In honor of Jacob Miller and the Equal Access Movement, for turning adversity into advocacy and inspiring a community to rise together." Standing with Emma and the mayor, Jacob marveled at the sight. "I never thought it would go this far," he said, his voice soft with disbelief. Emma laughed lightly. "You always underestimated yourself, Jacob, but you've never underestimated the power of doing what's right." The end.